A few months ago, someone brought a video to my attention by a man named Sid Smith. The video is called How to Enjoy the End of the World. Now, Sid Smith is a Green Party member, environmentalist, and this is a video basically describing a certain doomsday projection and how to prepare for it. And normally I don't pay much mind to that kind of thing from green people. I assumed it would be all climate change, hysteria, and things like that. And you guys know my opinions on climate change. I could do a whole video on that, but I think everybody is already kind of aware of what's going on there. But I watched it nonetheless, and it was very interesting because it brought up a concept that I had never heard of called EROI. Now, EROI stands for Energy Return on Investment. So if you look at the graph here, this is a really basic one. This is from Forbes, I believe. And it's a relative EROI for various energy sources. So you can see on the far low end you have solar or photovoltaic, that's PV, and then at the far right end you have nuclear power. Now, oil, which is our main power source for everything, is going to have very, very high EROI. But the thing that most people don't really understand is that oil EROI is declining. So this led to a whole theory called peak oil. People are saying that oil is going to become harder and harder to extract, and therefore oil's viability as an energy source is going to go down. So if you look at this graph, oil initially had an energy return on investment of 1,200, which is absurdly high. And that's sort of what allowed a massive industrial boom in this era, right? Your 1920s to 50s. So it has only been declining. And if you look into the inset, you can see it's dropped below 70, and in the mid-2000s we're down to under 10. Now, this was an interesting study. I'm not 100% sold on this one. The average EROIs I've seen for oil is like 20 to 15, so to say that it's below 10 is probably a little bit inaccurate. I think this was also conflating oil and gas together, and gas is going to bring oil down because it is not as viable as oil is. But nonetheless, you can see the trend here, and this is only going to get worse and worse. So back to the first graph, you can see at this number 7, this is where economic viability is reached. So anything that is below 7 is never going to be able to be mass produced in an economic setting. So you have things like solar and wind, as of now, are not economically viable by themselves. So they are getting government subsidies and things that make them profitable. But from an energy perspective, they are not profitable at all, meaning it takes more energy to extract the energy from these sources than the energy you actually get out. So this is something that was hard for me to get across, is this is not just a purely economic question. This is a matter of energy. You cannot expend more energy than you get out of something for it to be viable for massive industrial widespread use. So oil, as you can see, had a very, very high EROI, which is what allowed pretty much effortless construction of a global industrial system, right? And now you can see solar, wind, biomass, these are probably never going to be viable. And solar, the thing with solar is even if it does become viable, people keep saying, oh, we'll get more and more efficient solar cells. Well, these are all based on rare earth minerals for the batteries, right? So the battery is the hard part. And the only way we can make it totally viable as a replacement for oil is with solar batteries, which are going to become very, very scarce as solar does start to take over oil. And you can see gas, right? That's a non-renewable resource that's dwindling. Coal is dwindling. Hydropower, once again, this is good, but it's very localized. You can't power the entire world with hydroelectric power. It's just not feasible. Then we come to nuclear. So this is pretty interesting. Nuclear energy, we all know it's supposedly, the solution to the energy crisis. And in the video that I'm referring to, Sid Smith, he totally ignored nuclear. He just said it wasn't going to happen due to the political resistance to it, right? People aren't going to unite enough to find nuclear energy to be a viable solution, which I think was a little bit presumptive, right? I mean, once we start to have pressure from dwindling oil, we're going to need a new source of energy. But from there, I kind of looked into uranium and how feasible is uranium production. And the answer is we could possibly have already passed peak uranium. I didn't know there would be an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to peak uranium, but you can go and read this. Basically, to summarize, there's 6 million tons of uranium in the world, of which less than 1% is actually the uranium that undergoes nuclear fission for energy production. So you have uranium-238 and uranium-235. Uranium-235 is the only isotope that is usable for energy production, which is very, very scarce. It is 0.7% of all uranium. So whatever our current uranium stores are, divide that by 100, and that's how much your actual usable uranium stores are. But even then, they say with the current amount of uranium we have, which we probably won't get too much more that is easily extracted at an economic level, we have about 130 years of uranium. So that's if everything goes according to plan and we could totally move to uranium, we could only extend ourselves another 130 years. But there's also thorium reactors, which thorium is much more abundant than uranium. But for some reason, and I didn't look too deeply into this, I've heard a lot of good things about thorium reactors, but the UK came out with a statement that basically said they were economically unfeasible. I don't know why they said that. Perhaps it's just the timing, and maybe it will become more economically feasible as other resources start to dwindle. But essentially they said there's a massive, massive cost towards creating new thorium reactors. Not to say that there isn't for uranium reactors, but the thing is, all of the reactors that are already in existence, even the defunct ones, are all uranium reactors. So all of this is really just the preface for the fact that this is a very realistic situation that we do run out of energy. So oil is peaking, uranium has already peaked. What are we going to do when we actually run out of energy? Maybe there'll be a scramble to make all of these reactors, but there are not that many reactors in existence, and like Sid Smith said, the political situation means, do you see a vast amount of reactors being built in the near future? I say probably not. So we should start preparing for the reality that there actually is an energy crisis. And in my opinion, this would actually be a really, really good thing, and possibly the best outcome for right-wing people across the world. Because one of the greatest things that is keeping us from living a healthy, traditional lifestyle is technology. And as oil starts to run out and the economic industrial complex starts to collapse, we are going to be forced to move into the country, provide for our own food, and from there is going to develop more traditional lifestyles, right? So this should be satisfying to both environmentalists, reactionary traditionalists, and everybody within that spectrum. The only people a energy crisis is not good for is women, leftists, bug men, the types that are weak and unable to fend for themselves. But you do realize that if there is an energy crisis and industry and technology starts to fail, the real men of the world, the strong, capable men, this is our time to assert ourselves. We are going to take our rightful, prominent place in the world. We will go back to being protectors and providers and all of these things that we should be and have been historically. It is this vast energy system that is preventing us from doing that. So, ultimately, I want to say that we should start seeing this as a possible inevitability. I really want this whole peak oil thing to be 100% legit. Not to say that I'm going to put all my eggs in that basket, but when people are going to be traditional and anti-technology, oftentimes they're just looked at like they're absolutely crazy, and there's no viable way that this could ever be achieved. Well, this is a totally viable way that we're going to start seeing results of probably in the next, 30 to 50 years, right? As resources become harder to come by, and as our society gets larger, we're only going to be pulling more and more resources, which is only going to exacerbate the fact that EROI has been going down. So keep this in mind when you think of whether a true reversion to a traditional, more pastoral, agrarian type society is possible, and I think it 100% is, and we need to start acting like it and behaving like it and talking like it.